Start. Great. Hello, everybody. Hi, and welcome. Thanks for joining our webinar today. We are going to get started shortly, probably at about 1 minute past. We are just going to wait for a few more people to join the call. So welcome, everyone. It's good to see so many of you joining us. Just going to give it a few more seconds. Okay, well, let's get started. So hi, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. We're delighted to have so many of you join us today to continue AnswerLab's spring webinar series to learn about how to test voice assistants remotely. My name is Naomi. I'm part of the team here at AnswerLab. And before we get started, I just want to run through a couple of quick housekeeping items. First off, I just want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and everyone that is registered will receive a recording via email after this is over. If you have any questions that you'd like to submit, please do that via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and our speakers will cover as many as possible at the end of this presentation. And I want to let you know that we have about 45 minutes of content today, including time to get to your questions at the end. So we'll make sure to keep to that 45 minutes to keep you on track for your day. Okay, so for those of you that don't know us, AnswerLab is a full-service UX research company that provides user experience research, consulting services, and flexible research engagement models to help companies apply a human-centered design process to every product that they launch. Today, you'll be hearing from members of our emerging tech practice who focus on our work in the emerging tech and voice experiences space. And our mission is to help create experiences that people love. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker for today. So Ben Hoops is a senior UX researcher with more than a decade of experience in digital product development, strategy, and user research. He specializes in designing, conducting, and reporting on qualitative research, including in-depth interviews and usability studies. Ben is a member of our emerging tech practice, and one of his practice areas is in voice interfaces. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ben.
All right, well, thanks so much, Naomi, and thank you everyone for joining today. Voice user interfaces, also known as voice UIs or VUIs, are one of my favorite types of interfaces to work with. And when the pandemic began, a lot of us dove headfirst into conducting research on these types of interfaces remotely. So I'm really excited to share some of what I've learned with you along the way today. And I also just want to give everyone a quick heads up. Today, we're going to be doing some live demonstrations. And throughout the presentation, I'm going to say some phrases such as, hey, Google and Alexa. So that might trigger your devices if I haven't already. So just fair warning that your devices might wake up. So feel free to take a moment and mute your devices or hide them or hide yourself, whatever works. All right, so when I talk about voice UIs, voice assistants, or digital assistants today, I am talking about interfaces that we control with our voice. And that can include, but is by no means limited to Alexa, Siri, Google Assistant, your smartwatch, or an in-car system like Android Auto, along with the myriad of actions and skills that partners can add to those platforms. Voice assistants are a rapidly growing market. I've seen estimates that as much as a third of the US population is conducting voice searches every month. And we're learning more every day about ways that consumers and companies can find value in them. So today, we're going to be focusing primarily on remote methods for voice UI research. And I know with the vaccine becoming more widely available, many folks are excited to jump back into in-person research, which is wonderful. But as you do so, and as you're scoping your next studies, I do want to encourage you to keep in mind some of the hidden benefits of remote research. And specifically, I want to highlight some of those benefits as they relate to remote voice UI testing. So first of all, in remote testing, the user is typically in their home, which can, of course, make your study setting more realistic. If during your session, your participants in their pajamas talking to a device, you've just about nailed the real world experience for a big chunk of our population over the last year. That being said, just bear in mind that no study is going to have a perfectly realistic environment. So, for example, if during, to test your participant moves their smart display to a new location for the study, that can actually impact your findings. So maybe the participant's smart display is usually out of reach in the corner of their kitchen, but they move it onto their desk for your research. They might interact with it differently. They might touch it more, they might look at it more. And that's not a reason to trash your whole study plan, but it's just something to bear in mind as you're considering the implications of your findings. And that's true for lab research as well. So, you're going to want to keep refining your methods here and making sure you're providing, as much instruction as possible to make that setting very realistic. But, just bear in mind, it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. But just by going remote, you're actually bringing your participant closer to a real life experience than what they would have had in a lab. And that can lead to deeper and potentially more contextually relevant insights. A second benefit of remote research is that it provides access to a wider swath of the population who may not normally make it into your lab. You might have seen articles about the lack of diversity in the creators of voice technology and artificial intelligence. And that's why it's even more important in voice UI studies to have a diverse recruit of participants. By over-indexing on your most vulnerable and marginalized users, it's going to help prevent you from developing blind spots. And by exposing those blind spots, it's going to help you build better products that are easier to use, and it's going to make all of your users happier. And so let's talk about some of the potential challenges of remote VUI research. So with more devices comes more risk. And it's important in all research, but especially in this type of research, to make sure that you're testing your tech setup with a mock participant at least a couple of days ahead of your research sessions, if not further out, to make sure that you have time to iron out any kinks in your tech setup. If you are using a live experience or a high fidelity prototype, you'll want to make sure that your mock participant can hear the device clearly over the video call. That is, if they're not using a device that's in their own home. You'll want to make sure that the device can hear the participant, and you want to make sure that your participant can also see your device so they can react to any visual cues or screens. And you also want to make sure that your video conferencing software can pick up and record all of the audio and video interactions necessary. And as we go through the demonstrations, I'm going to provide some tips on ways to achieve each of these. And before we jump into the demonstrations, I just want to touch on one more very important aspect of your preparation, which is permission. So when you're testing with live devices, it's paramount that the participant knows what to expect in terms of what data, including what voice data, they're going to need to share. So you'll want to let them know before they agree to the session. If the participant is using their own device, there's a chance that the device could potentially share personal information. It could share personally identifiable information, known as PII, during the course of your session. So whoever is recruiting your study needs to let participants know ahead of time so that the participant can provide informed consent. Now, if the participant also needs to be signed into a third-party app within their digital assistant, you'll also want to let them know that ahead of time. They'll need to agree to that in case they need to provide personal information or data to that third party. Now, if you're testing the setup experience for a VUI or a third-party app VUI, you may want to provide credentials for a test profile. And that way the participant won't have to risk exposing their own credentials during the session. And a great way to avoid most of these hurdles is actually just to have the participant interact with a device that is in the researcher's physical location. And we're going to demonstrate this in a couple ways today. And that way you don't have to worry about getting the participant access to the device, accessing the participant's data, or any of those other concerns. However, wherever that test device is going to be located, you're still going to need to let participants know if they'll need to create a voice profile to test the feature in question. And a voice profile is basically a set of characteristics about your voice that can help identify you to the VUI. They can be used to personalize the experience of whoever's speaking, but they can also be used, they're sometimes required, in fact, by different apps and features within VUIs to be sort of a security feature. So for example, with some financial and transactional applications. So participants need to know ahead of time if their voice is going to be used to create a profile during your study as well. All right, so let's demonstrate a few methods now. So we're going to go through 3 different methods and a couple of examples for some of these. So first, we'll look at how to test a low fidelity voice user interface prototype. We'll also check out how to test a low fidelity VUI prototype that has a visual animated stimuli component. And lastly, we'll demonstrate a couple of experiences on live VUI experiences and how to test those. And along the way, I'll explain some of the benefits and idiosyncrasies of each method. All right, so let's start with low fidelity VUI prototypes. Now, these are great for testing conversational design. And so conversational design is exactly what it sounds like. It's designing all the aspects of the conversation between the user and the interface. So you may want feedback on responses or suggestions that your voice user interface might offer. And you also might want to observe the commands and questions and utterances that participants tried using to achieve their goals. And so there's lots of ways that you can do this. There's lots of ways that you can conduct research on the different aspects of conversational design. For example, it could be as simple as turning off your camera and pretending to be the voice assistant while your participant gives you commands and questions. If you're working with a VUI that has a screen, such as a smart display, you might do research solely on the screen designs and showing participants mocks and discussing how they might interact with them. You might even show them a video clip or an audio clip to gauge their expectations and reactions to a new concept. So for our first demonstration, I'm going to show you an example of a method called Wizard of Oz testing. So let's imagine that you're working on a hospitality experience and you ask your participants something like, what would you do if you wanted to find out if you have enough hotel points to book a free stay for your upcoming vacation? Your participant might say something to your imaginary digital assistant. You can even use just an image of a digital assistant on screen, like we have here. They might say something like, hey, digital assistant, how many hotel points do I have? And your digital assistant might respond with,
you have 24,000 points. Would you like to book a hotel room?
And so in the back room, I'm just using a text-to-speech generator to respond and make it feel more like an actual digital assistant. And there's a lot of different ones you can use. I just used one called naturalreaders.com. And there's a screenshot of what the interface looks like on this slide. And we'll send out links to all these tools that I mentioned after the presentation, so don't worry too much about writing down exact links. And this method is called Wizard of Oz testing because the moderator is really the wizard behind the curtain, manually creating this sort of magical experience. On a technical note, when I shared my screen in Zoom with you today, I made sure to enable the share audio feature so that that will actually allow your participant to hear any audio that's coming from your computer. And one benefit of this method is its flexibility. So the moderator can type in responses on the fly, or they can copy and paste from a pre-created list of responses in a Google Sheet. And so in an example like this, you can also reduce bias by randomizing the order of the variations that your participants hear first. And again, since you're kind of manually copying and pasting here, it's really easy to shuffle these responses to get a more unbiased feedback. Another great tool for studying conversational design and creating low fidelity prototypes is a tool called VoiceFlow. And it allows you to create a more standardized type of prototype and even create prototypes in web links that you can send to your participants. So I'm going to show you an example of one of those. So this is what a VoiceFlow prototype looks like when your participant receives it. And so let's do another example. So let's imagine you've asked your participant how they would go about trying to figure out how heavy of a coat to wear today. They might say something like, "What's the weather today?"
It's 75 degrees and sunny. Would you like me to suggest an activity?
Yes.
Why don't you go for a walk along the pier?
Okay, so that was the interface that the participant would see. And the screenshot here is showing sort of the behind the scenes workspace view that the researcher can create. And so you can see here, I sort of created a kind of a decision tree for the participant to follow. And I also added an image into the last piece, which you don't have to do, of course, but if you're studying an interface that has a display, that can come in handy. And this is a great method for, like I said, when you want to create a more standardized flow, maybe you're doing some sort of unmoderated testing, you can send this prototype to participants. It also has the ability for you to revoke access. And so that can be helpful from a technical and prototype security perspective. And it's fairly simple to get started with VoiceFlow. There are a lot of YouTube tutorials. It's fairly robust and has a lot of features and some different integrations, including the ability to launch skills and actions to Alexa and Google Assistant. This tool, along with that previous one I was showing you, operates on a freemium model, so you can try it out before you dive in. And there are other tools similar to VoiceFlow, and just FYI, we don't have any affiliation with any of the tools that I'm going to mention today. These are just some of the ones that we recommend. Now, if you'd like to test out a feature that involves animation, like something that you might see on a smart display, you can actually create a great low fidelity animated prototype right in Google Slides. So for example, maybe you're testing a scenario where your participants are using their smart display to entertain their kids. They might give a command like, "Hey, digital assistant, what sound does a lion make?" And it might respond with. And so I just used QuickTime to create an MP3 file here, and I use a program called Snagit to create a GIF. and insert both of those into this Google Slides presentation that you're seeing here. And I left some instructions on the left side of this slide. There are a couple of tricks to getting it to work if you're using QuickTime. For example, you have to convert the MP3 file or the MP4 file to an MP3, but that's very simple. You just need to change the suffix of the file name. But like I said, there's lots of different tools that you can use to create these little artifacts that you can include in your testing. Now, similar to the other low fidelity methods that I mentioned, this can work well for testing out concepts before you invest resources to develop them further. And this will allow you to understand where the value lies and answer other questions that you have before diving in further. All right, so lastly, let's do a couple of live demos with live experiences. And so you can conduct research on a live experience or a high fidelity prototype when you want feedback to iterate on something further along in the development cycle or something that's already live. For some live experiences and high fidelity prototypes, you can have the participant interact with the prototype on their own device, or you can have them verbally communicate, as I mentioned before, with a device in the moderator's location. And I'm going to show you the second method. And so having a participant communicate with a device in the researcher's location. And so again, I'd recommend keeping the device in the researcher's location for any difficult to share prototypes. So, if you want to avoid having to ship a device to someone, or maybe it would require updating firmware on somebody's device or having to get permission to get access to their device. Again, this is just a way to avoid kind of a lot of those headaches. And you'll get to see how it works here. And so I'm going to show you first on an Alexa device, and then I'll show you how to do this also on a Google Assistant app on a phone. So let's start with an Alexa device. And I want to warn you again, if you're in the room with an Alexa, this might trigger your device. So bear with me really quickly while I set this up here. All right, so you should be able to see an Alexa device now. Oops, stop. And my colleague Sylvia is going to be helping us to demonstrate this method. So hello, Sylvia. Feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yep, I'm here.
Perfect. Well, let's imagine that you're our participant, and imagine that I asked you, let's say you're getting ready to go to a friend's house and you want to figure out how heavy of a jacket to wear. What might you ask your smart speaker here?
Alexa, what's the weather?
In Washington, it's 67 degrees Fahrenheit with mostly sunny skies. Today's forecast calls for more of the same, with a high of 76 degrees and a low of 51 degrees.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you, Alexa. I'm going to come back to our...
You got to mute her now.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, there you go.
This is the constant challenge here. So you should all now be able to see the presentation again. And let me switch.
You want to switch it to you? Yeah.
Yep. Perfect. So all I did here in Zoom, as you can see from this screenshot, was to switch my video from my built-in laptop camera, which is pointed at my face, of course, to an external camera that is pointed at the device. And I'm just using a standard Logitech external webcam here, and we're using my computer audio. I just have the computer volume turned up, and I have the Alexa device turned up pretty high, and that'll allow both parties, the device and the participant, to hear each other. And before I let Sylvia off the hook, I want to do one more. And again, we're going to do this next one on a phone. You won't be able to see me set this one up either, but I took a screenshot, which you can see on the left, of the technique I'm going to use here. So if you're testing in Zoom, there's a really handy feature for mobile app testing, which allows you to mirror your iPhone screen using either AirPlay or by connecting your phone cable to your laptop. And I'll explain that in a little bit more depth after we demonstrate it. So bear with me a moment while I set up that feature. All right, and now it should pull up. All right, great. Oops. Okay, and so you should all be able to see my phone now. And Sylvia, if you would please be our mock participant again and show us how you would use Assistant to figure out how heavy of a coat to wear today.
Hey, Google, what's the weather today?
It'll be partly cloudy there today, with a forecasted high of 75 and a low of 53. Currently it's 69 degrees and partly cloudy.
All right, great. Let me just shift back to our presentation here. All right, so depending on the video conferencing software that you end up using and the type of device that you're using, there are going to be various features and limitations. As I mentioned, Zoom has this handy feature that works well with sharing the screen and the sound of an iPhone without actually joining the meeting from your phone. You just have to be on the same Wi-Fi network as the computer that's in the meeting. I don't believe this is available on Android. So if you're testing on an Android device, you may want to use the webcam option that I previously demonstrated. And if you're thinking, well, why don't I just join the meeting from my Android device? Well, typically your phone won't let you use the microphone in two apps at the same time. In this case, Zoom and Google Assistant. So now these are all things that you can test out with a mock participant ahead of time and just tweak to get the setup right for whichever voice UI and conferencing software combination that you're going to be using. One other thing to note for both of these experiences that I just showed, I used a test profile. And to do that, I just set up a Gmail address specifically, only used for testing. And I used that to create a profile in both Alexa and Assistant. Okay, so those are all of our demos, and we're going to jump into some Q&A in just a moment. But before we dive into that, I just want to mention some ethical considerations that we want to keep in mind, especially since this is such a new technology that we're working on. The experiences that you create are, of course, going to impact your users when you launch them, but they can also have real impacts on participants within the confines of your research sessions. So you might have experienced or heard about issues with VUIs not recognizing people's voices who have speech impediments, or not understanding people who speak in various English vernaculars, or if you're testing in other languages, various vernaculars in those languages. And a device not understanding a participant can actually put them in a really negative headspace. One reason for that is that speech is our natural mode of communication with one another. So a perceived failure here can really feel like a failure of the participants' basic human interaction abilities, even if they don't usually have difficulty communicating with real people. So, at the beginning of your sessions, there's some things you're going to want to tell your participant. Make sure to let them know that, of course, you're testing the experience and not their abilities. Any issues that pop up are the devices or the VUI's fault and not theirs. You'll also want to let your participant know that if they need to, or if they want to pause or terminate the session at any point, they absolutely can. And make sure that you're scheduling moments throughout your interview for temperature checks where you're checking in on their emotions, the impact that the experience is having on them in the moment, and also asking them how it might impact them if they experienced it in real life by themselves. And, if, again, just continually kind of reminding your participants if you start noticing that they're kind of getting frustrated, just reminding them that if something's not working, it's the VUI's fault, and that's why you're testing it to improve it. If you notice that the participant is moving into sort of a negative emotional state, by all means, pause the session, ask them if they want to continue or not. You can let them know they'll still be rewarded if they want to end the session. And another option is just take a step back. You can pivot to interviewing them as opposed to testing on the device, and you can still get really highly valuable insights about their unique experience. And it might be easy to think of some of these users and scenarios as edge cases, but just remember, like I mentioned earlier, that by working to create an experience that your most vulnerable users love, it's going to have a ripple effect, and it's going to make a better and easier to use experience for all of your users. So make sure you're recruiting a diverse panel of participants for your research, including different racial identities and people with disabilities. And as I mentioned at the beginning, remote voice UI research makes it easier to access a larger and more diverse participant population. And so that is all I have. And let's jump into the Q&A. Sylvia may join in case any of your questions stump me. I believe Naomi will be letting me know our questions.
I will. Thanks, Ben. Okay, let's take a look at some of these. The first question here is, have you tested any device handoffs remotely? And if so, do you have any best practices or tips?
Yeah, great question. So device handoffs and cross-device experiences, those are super important to test. You might have experiences where somebody tries to make a transaction on a device, on their smart speaker, for instance, and you want to test if it feels secure and convenient to verify or authenticate their identity on their phone. And so you may be asking, you may be testing things like, does pushing to their phone, does that make the transaction feel more secure, or does it reduce the convenience of making a transaction on the smart speaker altogether? And one way to test that experience is you can actually have the device, like I showed you, in the researcher's location. The smart speaker, so the initial device that you're testing with, and the device that it's being kind of punted to, you can actually have that device in the participant's location. So for example, you might have a smart speaker in the researcher's location that the participant places their order on. And then for the next part of the experience, you can actually have your participant join the session and do the whole session from their phone. And a great platform for that is UserZoom Go. They have a really great mobile experience, and so you can have the participant look at a prototype on their phone for the second part of that experience. And UserZoom Go does a great job protecting the privacy of that link and kind of allowing you to do that seamless handoff experience.
Thank you. The next question here is, what web conferencing or video tools do you suggest for remote sessions?
Yeah, Zoom and UserZoom Go, as I mentioned, are two of the most robust and two of the ones that we recommend. Like I showed earlier, Zoom has that great mirroring feature if you're testing mobile prototypes. UserZoom Go is great as well for its mobile capabilities. Both are great for desktop experiences, and you can use both for different smart speaker experiences as well. There are also devices. There are actual like VUI standalone devices like Portal, for example, that will allow you to install Zoom on the device. So you can actually, share a mock on screen through Zoom on a Portal device, flip on the annotations feature, and your participant can kind of tap around and you can see where they're touching on the screen, and really test that touch screen and know what the participant is focusing on.
Great. And Ben, do you have any advice for recruiting participants who have voice assistants?
Yeah, so for recruiting, there are some different things you may want to consider. You may want to consider sort of the different persona characteristics of your users. So as you're going through your recruit, you might want to hear from folks who have more experience with voice assistants or your particular voice user interface. And you might also want to hear from people who have less experience and get both of those perspectives so that you can compare. There's also so many different types of households that use smart speakers and smart displays. So you might want to recruit, one segment of families or parents and compare that with folks who have roommates or who live on their own. You can even compare things like participants and their different social habits. You could do like introverts versus extroverts and see how they each perceive your experience. And typically, we recommend 6 participants per stratification, and we feel that is enough to kind of efficiently get a well-rounded group of insights of each of those segments.
Great. Next one here, what is the ideal session length for testing low fidelity prototypes?
Yep. So typically, we'll conduct sessions anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half. I've seen even as short as 15 minutes. But, generally some things you're going to want to consider are just, how many questions and what's the scope of your experience. I'd recommend factoring at least 1 to 2 minutes per question that you want to ask your participant, including like probing questions, follow-up questions. And you'll also want to consider the turnaround time that you need for your insights. So, the shorter you make those sessions, the quicker you'll also be able to get through that analysis.
Can I add something to that, Ben? Since we had a question, another question in the channel. I think in the sense of kind of how many tasks we would recommend as well, something to consider is how long it would take to switch between devices. If the device is just in your space and somebody just has to talk to it, like I did as a mock participant, that's going to be a lot shorter than Ben having to change his camera or having the participant open a Zoom link on a Portal device. So really considering your technology as well is a big deal for session length.
Yeah, great point.
Thank you. Next question here is, what metrics are out there for benchmarking voice UI effectiveness?
Yeah, so typically you can use your standard benchmarking metrics, things like ease of use, time on task, usefulness, reliability, those types of things that'll work for all sorts of different experiences. For VUIs specifically, you may also want to consider things like your participants' perception of the length of the VUI's responses. For voice UIs, participants can't like skim through a response, so they're going to have to listen to the whole thing. So you may want to test the length of those responses. You can test things like how natural it sounds, or you can benchmark metrics, even things like friendliness or these kind of personality traits. you may hypothesize that, if your participants perceive your experience to be more friendly, that they'll spend more time on it. And so maybe the amount of time spent is kind of your primary metric that you want to increase. And your your secondary metric is the friendliness of the device. So you can really think about, like I said, your standard benchmarking metrics, as well as these more kind of like really voice focused and like personality focused metrics for benchmarking. And there have been some fairly in-depth kind of standardized metrics questionnaires that have been developed, and we can share a link in our follow-up email to some of those as well.
Can I add to that as well, Ben?
Of course.
Cool. Yeah, somebody asked how we evaluate the efficacy of voice assistance. So how do we know that it really even solved the problem? And I think in this scenario as well, it really depends on the metrics you decide to choose. If that is something you're going for even before testing any prototypes, considering where a user is, the context, other pieces of what encompasses a voice experience is very important. Internally to AnswerLab, we have created some of our own metrics utilizing the standards that Ben has just mentioned. And so we utilize those when we're helping our clients test VUIs as well.
Excellent, awesome.
Okay, I think we've got time for a couple more. This next one is, how can we design research to make VUIs more accessible?
Great question. So one way to do that is really just to conduct research with participants who have various types of disabilities. For example, if you're testing on a smart display, you may want to test both users who are hard of hearing and see, what's their experience using the screen more specifically, and if they're able to do that. Also, you may want to test with low vision users and see their experience trying to use primarily voice and their oral senses to use your experience. If someone has a physical or a cognitive disability that impacts their speech or their ability to interact with any buttons on the VUI, those are great folks to speak with as well, and just better understand ways that you can work to accommodate folks with those types of disabilities. Again, by working with your kind of most vulnerable users, it may help you uncover something that ends up making your experience easier to use for all of your different users. So great question.
Great. I think we've got time to squeeze one more in. Are there any books or articles or other resources that you would recommend?
Yeah, so one good one is Designing User Interfaces by O'Reilly Media. And there are tons of different articles. We can, again, follow up in our email after this presentation with some of our favorite articles.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben and Sylvia. We're getting close to 45 minutes, so I think we're going to wrap up the Q&A for today. I would like to thank you all for joining us, and we hope that you found today's discussion helpful. For more information on AnswerLab's VUI services, you can visit the link here on screen. And I also want to take this opportunity to let you know about the next webinar in our spring series. On May 4th, we're hosting a follow-up to our Inclusive Research Recruiting webinar, and we're doing a deep dive into exclusion gap research and taking the next step in determining the inclusivity of your products. So we hope that you can join us for that too. If you're on our events list, you should receive an invite. If not, if you want to go to answerlab.com/events, you'll be able to sign up there. And with that, I would just like to thank you again for joining. You'll receive a copy of this recording shortly via email, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.